Hi, I'm Sherita, and I'll be reading Pinocchio, a copyright 2017 of Disney Enterprises Incorporated, all rights reserved, published by Bendon Incorporated. Pinocchio. Once upon a time, there was a friendly cricket named Jiminy. One night, Jiminy's cricket's travels took him to the workshop of Geppetto, an old wood carver. Geppetto had just finished making a little boy puppet. Now Geppetto said, "I have just the name for you, Pinocchio." Then he added softly, "He almost looks alive." That evening, Geppetto looked up at the twinkling wishing star. "I wish I may, I wish I might have the wish I make tonight," Geppetto said. He wished for Pinocchio to become a real boy. Soon after, Geppetto, his cat Figaro, and Cleo the goldfish were fast asleep. Only Jiminy Cricket was still awake. Suddenly, a bright blue light filled the workshop. The beautiful blue fairy appeared. "Good Geppetto," she said gently, "you have given so much happiness to others. You deserve to have your wish come true." And Geppetto was wishing, and there's the cat. Waving her wand over Pinocchio, she said, "Little puppet made of pine, wake, the gift of life is thine." Magically, Pinocchio began to stare. "I can move," he said in amazement. "I can talk." "Prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish," said the blue fairy, "and someday you will be a real boy." The fairy asked Jiminy Cricket to be Pinocchio's conscience, to teach him right from wrong. "Now, remember, Pinocchio," she added, "be a good boy and always let your conscience be your guide." And with that, she disappeared. Geppetto woke and saw Pinocchio walking and talking. At first he thought he must be dreaming, but then he realized his wish had come true. Geppetto was so happy. Next morning, Geppetto sent Pinocchio off to school. On the way, two villains, a fox called Honest John and his friend a cat called Gideon, spotted Pinocchio. Honest John cried, "A live puppet without strings. He could sell him to Stromboli's puppet show and make lots of money." The villain convinced the little puppet that becoming an actor would be much more fun than school. Jiminy tried to stop Pinocchio from leaving with the villains, but Pinocchio was too excited to listen. That night, Pinocchio sang and danced merrily in the puppet show. The audience clapped and cheered with delight. Pinocchio was a star. However, the little puppet asked to go home. Stromboli, the owner of the show, roared with anger. He locked Pinocchio in a cage and bellowed, "This will be your home now." Alone and frightened, Pinocchio sobbed, "I should have listened to you, Jiminy." He was locked in a cage. Suddenly the blue fairy appeared and said, "Pinocchio, why didn't you go to school?" The little puppet was afraid to tell the truth. "Two big monsters with big green eyes," he fibbed. "Well, they tied me in a big sack." As soon as Pinocchio told this lie, his nose began to grow. The more Pinocchio lied, the longer his nose grew. Look at that, his nose grew long, like a tree branch. "Perhaps you haven't been telling the truth, Pinocchio," said the blue fairy. "A lie keeps growing and growing until it's plain as the nose on your face." "I'll never lie again," promised the little puppet. So the blue fairy gently touched Pinocchio's nose with her wand and turned it back to normal. She unlocked the cage and set him free. There's the blue fairy. "Come on, Pinocchio," cried Jiminy. But as the little puppet raced after Jiminy, he met up with Honest John and Gideon again. This time, they persuaded Pinocchio that he was ill and needed a holiday at a wonderful place called Pleasure Island. They were going to convince him to go. The two villains sold Pinocchio to a wicked coachman who put him on a coach full of noisy and naughty boys. Luckily, Jiminy was able to climb onto the coach just as it drove off. And there's the coach that he was drove off in. Pleasure Island was like a giant fun fair. The boys could have anything they wanted and be as naughty as they liked. Jiminy begged Pinocchio to leave, but the little puppet wanted to stay and play pool with his new friend, Lampwick. Jiminy saw the wicked coachman loading crates of donkeys onto the boat. One of the donkeys was crying and begging to go home with his mother. Jiminy was shocked. Somehow all the boys on Pleasure Island were being turned into donkeys. He needed to rescue poor Pinocchio. Look at that. By the time Jiminy found his friend Pinocchio, had already grown long, hairy ears and a tail. "Come on, quick!" cried Jiminy. "This way, Pinocchio!" Jiminy and Pinocchio escaped from the island by jumping into the sea and swimming home. This is where he grew a tail and long ears. Cold and tired, they finally reached Geppetto's house, only to find out that Geppetto had gone looking for Pinocchio across the sea and had been swallowed by a big whale named Monstro. Pinocchio was determined to find his father no matter how dangerous it would be. He and Jiminy headed back to the sea. Pinocchio and Jiminy asked the fish and seahorses to help. But as soon as they heard Monstro's name, the sea creatures sped off in terror. See the sea creatures? Meanwhile, not too far away, Monstro was waking up from a long sleep. The whale was so hungry that he gulped down a large school of fish. Without realizing, he managed to swallow Pinocchio too. Look at they're being swallowed, and along with Pinocchio. Deep inside the whale's tummy, Pinocchio and his father were overjoyed to see each other again. Pinocchio thought of a plan to escape. They built a fire to make lots of smoke inside Monstro. "We'll make him sneeze," said Pinocchio excitedly, as clouds of black smoke filled Monstro's tummy. See, Pinocchio was happy to see his father, Geppetto. He gave an enormous sneeze, and out all came on a little raft. But the whale crashed through the water. The little raft toppled over. Everyone was thrown into the sea, and Geppetto couldn't swim. Pinocchio kept his father afloat and dragged him to the shore. Minutes later, Jiminy found Geppetto, Figaro, and Cleo safely on the beach. But the little puppet was lying face down in the water. He wasn't moving. Heartbroken, Geppetto took his son home. They were sneezed out. Geppetto knelt over Pinocchio and wept. Just then, the blue fairy dazzling light filled the room once again. "Prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish, and someday you will be a real boy," said the fairy gently. "Awake, Pinocchio." She's telling Pinocchio to awake. Immediately, a bright light surrounded Pinocchio, and he woke up. He was no longer made of wood. He was a real boy at last. "Father, I'm alive, see?" Pinocchio cried out in delight. This calls for a celebration. Geppetto cried joyfully. Jiminy proudly watched Pinocchio playing happily with his father. Now he knew that if you wish upon a star, your dreams really can come true. They were so happy. There's Jiminy, Geppetto, Pinocchio, and Figaro. The end. Thanks for listening. Once again, this is Pinocchio. Good night.